Of the Rebbe to learn the Hilchas Beis Abchira in the days of Bein HaMetzorim and to give tzedakah. By the time when we learn the Beis Abchira, everybody should give tzedakah. We will ask, we have a choshev in German from the Rosh Yeshiva from Mesivta Ateres Mנחem, Harav HaChosid, Harav Levi Kaarp, that was Leforlan, and he's going to teach us halach in Hilchas Beis Abchira. Rav Kaarp, bevakasha.
Regarding the wall that divided the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, this is called in Lashon Gemara Amatraxin. The Rambam writes in Perek Daled, Halacha Beis and Hilchos Beis Abchira the following. The Rambam writes like this: Bayis Rishon, the first Beis Hamikdash, the Kodesh Ma'avlu ben HaKodesh ben Kodesh HaKadoshim Ovi Amo. Bayis Rishon, the first Beis Hamikdash, there was a wall that divided the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim. The thickness was an Amo. However, once they built the second Beis Hamikdash, they had a suffix in Oivei HaKodesh on Midas HaKodesh, and Midas Kodesh HaKadoshim. In other words, in the second Beis Hamikdash, they had a suffix that this Amma, the wall that was like Amma, was a part of the measurement of the Kodesh, it was a part of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So because they had a suffix, they didn't know what to do. The Fichach, therefore, in the second Beis Hamikdash, also Kodesh HaKadoshim Ovyim Esrim Amma, Tmimos. Therefore, they made the Kodesh HaKadoshim a complete 20 amas. But also, HaKodesh Rabbi Mama, what they did was, they made the Kodesh HaKadoshim 40 amas. The Kodesh, excuse me. And what they did was, they left an empty amma between the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim for the Amatraxim. And since in the Beis Hamikdash, they didn't have a wall, also shtei paroiches, they moved two paroiches in echem b'tzad HaKodesh HaKadosh and echem b'tzad HaKodesh v'neim Amma keneged Oivei HaKodesh shahaya b'berishus. So the Kitzer, what the Rambam writes over here is that in the first Beis Hamikdash they had a wall, I should say, that divided between the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadosh. And since in the second Beis Hamikdash they didn't know, was that part of the measurement of the Kodesh, which was 40 Amma, or was it part of the Kodesh HaKadosh, which was 20 Amma? So therefore, what they did was they added an Amma in between the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim, which that became the Amatraxim, and they made the Kodesh complete 40 Ammas, and they made the Kodesh HaKadoshim 20 Ammas. In other words, that the Pasuk says that the Kodesh HaKadoshim is 20 Ammas. The Kodesh is 40 Ammas. We don't know from the Pasuk the wall what measurement is a part of. Is a part of the Kodesh or part of Kodesh HaKadoshim? So we know it's altogether 60. But where does this wall fit in? So since we didn't know, so we had to do, we couldn't diminish the Kodesh or the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So we had to make the Kodesh 20 Ammas, the Kodesh HaKadoshim 20 Ammas, the Kodesh 40 Ammas. In between, they made an Amatraxin, which was an Amma. The Makar of the Rambam is from the Yishalmi, that the Yishalmi understands that the Etzim is supposed to be 60 Ammas altogether, and we just had a suffix where the Kodesh, where the Amatraxin falls in. The truth of the matter is that the Bavli seems to argue in the Yishalmi, and the Bavli seems to say is that it's a davar pashut when the pasuk says that the Kodesh HaKadoshim was 20 amas and the Kodesh was 40 amas. It means just the average, just the actual ear space of the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Amatraxin was, we didn't count that part of the 60. It was a measurement of its own, so it's what 61 altogether. Elamai, the suffix was a different suffix. Not if this Amatraxin was part of the measurement of the Kodesh or Kodesh HaKadoshim, but be'etzem, it's an Am of its own, 61 Amas. In other words, 20 for the Kodesh HaKadoshim and 40 for the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Shaila was what gather, what Kedusha did the Amatraxim have? Did it have the Kodesh or the Kodesh HaKadoshim? The Rambam seems to paskin like the Yishal. Whatever. Now the Rebbe asks many questions on the Shittas HaRambam. Number one is, if in the Beis Hamikdash Hasheni they didn't have a wall anyways, so why did they have to leave the airspace of the Amma? Why couldn't they just put a simple paroiches, similar to the way they had the Mishkan, and then everything would be fine? If they had a paroiches, which technically wouldn't take up anything, they had 20 for the Kodesh HaKadoshim and 40 for the Amma. Why did they have to leave Dafkin airspace with two paroiches on each side? Just put one paroiches. Question number one. Secondly, the Rebbe asks, we know, how were they able to change it? Because we know it says in the pasuk, which means everything that was done in the Beis Hamikdash was mipia nevuah. You couldn't just stand aside to make things nicer. The way it was, everything was made. Every detail was mipia gevura. Therefore, if it came out that the Kodesh HaKadoshim was right next to each other, who gave us a right to just add an amma in between the Kodesh HaKadoshim? You're changing from the way the Beis Hamikdash was supposed to be formed, also supposed to be built. What we're adding, besides we're adding an amma in between the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim, we're adding either on the Kodesh or Kodesh HaKadoshim, we're adding an amma part of it. Who gave us the right to do such a thing? Now, if we're going to say that the Rambam Taka learns that adding ear space is not a problem, it's only maybe the form of the Beis Hamikdash or what has to be done in the Beis Hamikdash, but space, the measurement, is not considered changing. If that's the case, then we have a different question, a better question. What was Taka the reason why the Beis Hamikdash Hasheni they didn't make a wall? The reason was because simply the wall in the Beis Hamikdash Harishon was 30 amas high. For something to be 30 amas high, it's good enough a foundation of amma. It stands. However, in the second Beis Hamikdash Hayis, it was a much taller wall, either 40 amas or 100 amas, depends on the gears of Rashi. Either way, you have to have a bigger foundation. So if the Rambam holds that adding measurement is not considered a shinui, so very simple. Why don't we need two paraychis and just make a takash tall koisel and make the koisel a little wider? Mikaraya, the taka the Rambam holds that adding the measurement is a shinui. So if it's a shinui, who gave us the right to add a amma between the kodesh and kodesh HaKadoshim and add a midah either in the kodesh or the kodesh HaKadosh? Another kasha that Rebbe asks is, why do we need two paraychis? Why don't we just make thick paraychis, a paraychis which is the midah is an amma? Why make one paraychis on one side and one paraychis on the other side? Make a paraychis which is thick and amma. Another diuk that the Rebbe is medayik in the lashon of the Rambam, which the conclusion of the Rambam writes like this. He speaks about the Beis Hamikdash Rishon, Beis Hamikdash Sheni, but then the Rambam continues, Hamikdash Rishon lo yesham al paraychis achas bolvad. But in the first Beis Hamikdash there wasn't a wall, there was only paraychis. Shenema, like the pasuk says, vivdila paraychis lochem. Now the Kes Mishnah right away is mayor. It can't be when the Rambam writes the Mikdash Rishon is going on the first Beis Hamikdash, because in the beginning of the halacha we explained that in the Beis Hamikdash Rishon there was a wall. So you can't say when the Rambam writes Hamikdash Rishon lo yesham al paraychis achas bolvad, meaning it's only paraychis. He's being soyiser mereishel l'seif. In the beginning he says it's a wall, and then he says it's paraychis. So the Kes Mishnah learns, even though it's a shtickle doichik in Lashon HaRambam, the Kes Mishnah learns that Mikdash Rishon means the Mishkan, which was Rishon. In other words, Mikdash means, I guess maybe the Lashon Takarama is not Beis Hamikdash Rishon. Maybe Mikdash Rishon means the Ershte Kedusha, the Mishkan. The Mishkan was only had a paraychis, didn't have a wall. But the shayla is very simple. Who kumt in the Mishkan over here? We're speaking about the Beis Hamikdash Rishon or Beis Hamikdash Sheni. Why does the Rambam conclude when you get the Mishkan? And for whatever reason he wants to mention when you get the Mishkan, let him start with the Mishkan. Why is he writing it? Why is he writing it at the end? So to understand that, we need to give a Hagdama of what was the purpose. The Amatrax and the Pashtos was Midin B'Proichis in the Mishkan. We have to understand what was the purpose of having a Paroichis between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So we look at the Lashonis of Psukim, you find two different Lashonis, which are basically two different inyanim, two different functions. In one place, the pasuk says, "V'ivdilu lachem," that the purpose of the paraychis, v'ivdila paraychis lachem ben kodesh v'ben kodesh hakadoshim. In other words, that the purpose of the paraychis was to separate the mechitza, to separate between the kodesh and the kodesh hakadoshim, midin mechitza. Another pasuk it says, "V'samtes ha'arein ha'idus," you should put in the kodesh hakadoshim the arein. V'sachois ha'arein as a paraychis, you should cover on top of the arein. You should put a partition, a masach, a covering, which was called the paraychis. In other words, there seems to be two inyanim, two functions, two ideas of what the purpose of the paraychis was. One was pashut to separate. You have two rooms. One is called kodesh hakadoshim. One is called kodesh. You need a separation. You need a partition. You need a mechitza to separate. Another idea seems to be that since you had the arein, Helik Kazak, you had the arein in the kodesh hakadoshim. So in order that the arein shouldn't be exposed, it shouldn't be begillah, you have to cover it over. So Pizeh, if that was the purpose of the Paroiches in the Mishkan, is a Pipashtus, the Amataxin, which was the similar idea of the Paroiches in the Mishkan was the Amataxin, the Amigdash, the Pashtus, the Amataxin, has these two inyanim too. That on one hand there was a mechitza to separate between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and on the other hand there was a covering, a partition, something to cover over that the Aron shouldn't be exposed. And the truth of the matter is that when we look in the Lashon, the word Amatraxin, there seems to be a machlokes Rashi and Tosfos what the meaning of traxin is. Rashi learns that traxin means Lashon Pnima Chutz, inside and outside, which means it's something that covers the inside as the Kodesh HaKadosh, and the outside the Kodesh. That's the way Rashi seems to learn. Meaning, al derech paroiches v'dim mechitza. However, Tosfos says that the word of Amatraxin comes from a different lashon, which is truku gali, which means it's covering over the Aron HaKodesh. So it seems to be that Rashi Taki explains that what is the word Traxin lashon Pnima Chutz, separating Kodesh and lashon v'dim mechitza. And Tosfos seems to explain that Traxin lashon truku gali, which means it's covering over the Aron. The emes, there's no real machlokes between Rashi and Tosfos. A couple we don't have to say machlokes between Rashi and Tosfos. Because Baram Mechadar and Ram Mechali Pligi, Be'etzem there was both in Yonim, both functions, both in Yonim, we find in the Paroiches. Sai was B'dim Mechitza, Sai was also mitzat covering over the Aron Kodesh. Elamai, the Shad is what the Iker Hagosha is. So Rashi teaches the Iker Hagosha is the Mechitza, like the Lashon HaPasuk B'dilach and the Paroiches, Ben HaKodesh, Ben HaKodesh HaKadosh, Mashiach and Tosfos, which has the tax in Lashon Trukagal, he's Madish in the Pasuk, V'sachoisa, V'samtas Aron, V'sachoisa Aron as a Paroiches. In Cain would seem to say that this is what the Nikud of Amatraxin is. But the Rebbe goes on to explain that L'chayr Shittas and Amam is not that way. Which means is that the Amatraxin, which is L'chayr, the copy of the Paroiches, has these two inyanim, but when we want to know what the Mohus, what the actual idea of the Amatraxin is, it's not this. So true, it has these two Pa'ulas, that it's a separation, it's a mechitza, partition between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and it also covers over the Aron HaEdos, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But if you want to know what the Mohus and together of the Amatraxin is, it's not that. What is the Amatraxin? And the reason is because the Pashtus, the Rambam learns that this would be, it's not something of its own, it's only as a to separate the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim, or something to cover over the Kodesh HaKadoshim, but in itself is not an inyan. But the Rambam seems to learn that the Amatraxin is an inyan of its own, which means is that there's something about the Amatraxin to the point that we find the Lashon HaPasuk, the Pasuk calls it a dvir. It's another chelik of the Beis HaMikdash. It's a chelik which is called, just like in the Kodesh, and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, there's something which is called a dvir. And now that is what the Amatraxin is. Elamai, it also has these inyanim that separates between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. What's taka the reason? What's taka the reason that the Amatraxin was an inyan b'fnei atzmai? L'chayra, seemingly the pashtus, it's a partition, it's l'chayra, a mechitza, a covering that separates between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So the Rebbe explains that that's based on what the shit of the Rambam, the first halacha, the Rambam writes. It says that the mitzvahs I say lasses bayis l'shem, like the pasuk says v'asel l'mikdash. It says it kind of sparish, but Torah, and the Torah already explains Mishkan sha'asa shleima v'hayli fisha. In other words, that the Mishkan the shleima did already is explained. L'chora, matahava, what's negay what we did in the Mishkan? L'chora, we're speaking halacha, a sefer of halacha. L'chora, what's negay elamah? The Rambam wants to teach us what's together of the Mishkan and what's together of the Beis HaMikdash. Like this, we can appreciate better what a Beis HaMikdash is. The chiluk is that the Mishkan is a makom arei. Masha'enki the Beis HaMikdash, everything in the Beis HaMikdash, even a side detail of the Beis HaMikdash, has to be kavua, and as part of the chiluk of the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore, the first Beis HaMikdash, they had a paroiches. The paroiches was inyan arei, separated between the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim. But in the Beis HaMikdash, everything in the Beis HaMikdash has to be a chiluk in the binyan, in the bias. It's a dover kavua, so therefore it can't just be a dover tzedadi. Which means is everything has to be inyan b'fnei atzmai. Al derech zeh, this wall, the Amatraxin, can't just be a separation, but the wall has to be something a chelik chashuv, which we call dvir. The Rebbe goes on to explain a little differently that perhaps the difference between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim was not just that Kodesh a helik platz, Kodesh HaKadoshim was nachechet. Kodesh HaKadoshim be'erech the Kodesh HaKadoshim is be'ein aroich. Therefore, between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, they needed to have something that connected the two. What was that memutza that connected between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim? That was the Dvir, that was the Amatraxim. So in other words, the Amatraxim was a chelik b'fnei atzmoi, which was a memutza between the Kodesh HaKadoshim, to the point. In other words, simply, it's how the person going into Kohen Gadol is going to Beis Hamikdash, Kodesh HaKadoshim. So before he enters the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he needs to shtel zuchov and say that I'm about to go into Kodesh HaKadoshim. And here, the Amatraxin is, so to speak, preparing him. And that's why the Rebbe points out very interestingly that in the Beis Hamikdash we find that in the second Beis Hamikdash, when they had the pareiches, so the opening on one pareiches was on this side, and the other opening was on the other side. So the pashtus was that you shouldn't be able to see inside. But the Rebbe explains that this Nakuda is in order that since it was a memutza, in order to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, so there had to be a hefsik. So the Pasha had to walk all the way. We made the Kohen Gadol walk all the way in order to be making himself. So based on this Nakuda, that we understand that the Amatraxim, according to the Rambam, is not only a mechitza, is not only a covering over the Aron HaKodesh, but it's a dvir, it's a makim b'fnei atzma, it's a chelik choshev, it's a mikdash, or a mutza. Based on that, we can understand why the Rambam couldn't just make him a pareiches, because it wasn't a partition, it wasn't a mechitza, it wasn't a separation, it was a chelik choshev. So therefore, we have to leave the Amatraxim Shreituis that I need to leave a chelik choshev. I need to have an amo. I can't just have a partition. I can't just have a pareiches. I need, that is something. That's a dvir. Pisa also why we couldn't make a pareiches, which was reichav amo, because besides the fact that a pareiches is a davar arai, but b'noisef lazeh, what has to happen? We have to bring out. We want to bring out over here that it's a chelik. It's not just a partition. If we had a mechitza, in other words, if you only had a pareiches, so the pareiches, we think that what is over here, the Amatraxin, it's a mechitza. But we want to bring up a carrot that we have to leave that there should be avir, that we should know that there's a chelik over here. A moltake was in a form of wall, but now it's an avir. Now, Pisa, we could also explain the third nekuda that we asked, Al-Chura, if the Rambam holds that being moisef avir, if we're going to hold that being moisef avir is considered a shinui, so how come they're able to leave out? How come they were allowed to leave a makim of avir Amatraxim that they added on the kodesh or kodesh HaKadoshim? The either gives that the Rambam holds that we were moisef on the wall. That's the teretz. The teretz is the Amatraxim wasn't adding. The Amatraxim was a chelik choshev. The poilam was a wall. Today we don't have walls, so we have to leave it open. A Pisa, we can understand why the Rambam was madgish very much bringing Minigei the Mishkan. Which we asked, why does the Rambam end off in Minigei the Mishkan? What's in Minigei the Mishkan? The teretz is because the Rambam wants to say, you Mepashtus will understand that the Amatraxin is a pareiches. Zok the Rambam, no. The pareiches in the Mishkan is only because separating. The Beis Hamikdash, it was something totally different. It's a makim b'fnei atzmai, it's a memutza, it's a chelik choshev, and therefore don't compare the two in Yonah. That Mr. Shem, it's a mikdash ashlishi, we won't have the suffix with the Mashiach Tzidkenu, that could be placed in the suffix. I just want to add one nekuda, perhaps it's a hergish. But Pashas, we know when they get one of the Yonim of the Rebbe is Takonis Limud the Rambam Bechlal, that the Rebbe in a certain way was Machzor Torah L'Yoshno, which means that upon him the Rambam for many generations when we learned the Rambam, so we understood as Rambam as a Chavis for G'dol Yisrael or Shivas to be Mechadish Rambam, but upon him the Mikotim Vat Godels gefelt that people should learn Rambam, that the Rambam, the purpose of learning Rambam was for Ish Poshet equivalently to God of Israel, or we to learn Rambam al Seder, and that was one of the Yonim that the Rebbe obviously taught us that what was the Kavanas of Rambam. The Rambam was that Rambam should be written on is written for the Mikotim Agadol. So that's Ba'ofen Kloli. But we speak Ba'ofen Prati B'negei Hilchos Beis Abchira. There's a very interesting Beis Yosef that Beis Yosef writes in Simon Gimel in Torah. He writes in B'negei Hilchos Hashkamas Haboker, the way to sleep, and we won't get into halacha prati, but the Beis Yosef writes like this. Beis Yosef says that that even though the world is noyig kedivra tesis, the Beis Yosef says nearly the reason why they're noyig that way, the reason is because they're not ma'ayin in hilchas beis abchira. And then the Beis Yosef continues on. Maybe one person in a generation or two people in a generation hilchas beis abchira, so they don't know this halacha. However, Beis Yosef says, no. Beis Yosef says is that even though the Welt weiß nicht von der Rambam, it's only Chad B'dara or Trei B'dara, but Hanachin Lizar Kedivei Rambam. So obviously we understand that benoisif to the fact that the Rebbe taught that Limud Rambam B'chalal is Shayech L'mikotim Vad Godel. So Hilchas Beis Abchira Baruch Hashem, we could say there's not made Chad B'dara or Trei B'dara. But Kshetim Soleimer, if you want, we could add that it's not only that the Rebbe taught us that Limud Hilchas Limud Rambam B'chalal is Shayech L'mikotim Vad Godel, and Hilchas Beis Abchira that Rebbe wanted that are Noshim with having kids in camp should learn Hilchas Beis Abchira. Well, Kshetim Soleimer, Ulev Shaloimer, that the Rebbe taught us to be Mekayim, obviously it's a Medrash, that by learning Hilchas Beis Abchira we're Mekayim another one of the 613 mitzvahs, because the Rebbe taught us that when you get the basic Medrash of Yecheskel, the Eibishter told Yecheskel when he gave the Midas Abayis and told him he should tell him the Yidden and Golos. So Yecheskel said the Yidden are in Golos. So he says, because the Yidden are in Golos, he is being in basic bottle. So, in other words, the tzivah v'asal mikdash v'shechanti v'soicham is not only something mizman shebeis hamikdash kayim. Even today in Galus, by learning Hilchas Beis Abchira, we're being mekayim the mitzvah say v'asal mikdash. So when we have a chad b'dara, trei b'dara, it's this one person's mekayim the mitzvah v'asal mikdash v'shechanti v'soicham. But when the Rebbe teaches us that every single person has to learn Hilchas Beis Abchira, which is a davar pasha, the Rebbe spoke about this. The Rebbe is teaching us that one of the mitzvahs of Asal Mikdash v'shechanti v'seichem is noig b'zman hazeh. L'idach Yisa, the Rambam writes, and this is unfortunate. I mean, Zicher Atos Mashiach, but one of the, I can't say Takanasenu, Kilgoseinu Takanasenu, in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, b'mikayim the mitzvah Asal Mikdash v'shechanti v'seichem. The Rambam writes in Perek Beis that everybody is mechuyev in Hilchas Beis Abchira. Everyone's mechuyev in building Beis Hamikdash, Anoshim and Noshim, but children are potter. Why children? Because today, on the other hand, even children, which in the time of the Beis Hamikdash weren't able to mekayim the mitzvah Asal Mikdash, today they're able to mekayim the Asal Mikdash. Takazoiches zayin that through Anoshim v'taf will be kind of it off the Rebbe. Takazoiches zayin should have this bini Beis Hamikdash pshutim. We'll figure out what the Amatraxin is part of the Kodesh or praise the Kodesh and take it from Yad Mamash.
Shkoyach. Right after Ma'ariv Yom there will be a Siyum Meseches, also a Roy from the Rebbe, and everybody has to say.